Today on Voice of the Valleys, a simple X post sent me down a massive rabbit hole of investigation with regards to a Somali daycare in Leicestershire. Some things that I think are important to bring forward. Not only that, an important study, 21-year follow-up of immigrant background and rape convictions in Sweden highlights some very alarming but predictable results. And a woman accused of being a plant on a BBC Question Time show, turns out she was likely a plant all along. All that and more today on Voice of the Valleys. Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Voice of the Valleys yet again with your host, friendly neighbourhood far-right thug, always satirical, unless it's not Mr. George Cresswell. Hope we're all doing well. Hope we're all having a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever we are. Obviously, getting straight into today, ladies and gentlemen, there's going to be a lot of talk today. There's some things I need to preface before I get into it, but we'll get into that in a moment. If you want to support the show or anything like that, if you want to get access to some exclusive content coming up, then make sure you get on over to the members areas. You've got a little bit of time left still if you want to get a question submitted for Catherine Watkins, who's going to be sitting down with me this Friday afternoon. Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen. She's going to be sitting down with me this Friday afternoon, so make sure you get your questions in by 12:30 p.m. GMT on the relevant membership platforms or supported platforms. So you've got Buy Me a Coffee, you've got Patreon, you've got Locals, and you've got the YouTube membership area. You'll also be getting early access to the conversation if you are part of the members areas. Getting straight into today, however, this is something I think that really is really important to highlight. I got sent down a rabbit hole last night, as I'll explain in a moment. But to preface some things, the things I'm going to be talking about in this next segment, and apologies if I end up talking myself around the mulberry bush a couple of times, because I haven't reached out to somebody to get their perspective on things like this, to bring this stuff forward. And there's been some developments in this story since I originally recorded this episode yesterday, which would be important to take into account. I want to stress categorically that there are no people or entities that will be accused of criminal activity in this episode. There are some things we're going to be talking about in light of the ever more revealing Somali scam, not call centers, daycare centers in Minnesota that Nick Shirley is exposing, that seems to have caused the downfall of a person that could have been vice president of the United States if the election had gone another way. Tim Walz has announced that he won't be running for re-election. It's because the weight of the fraud scandal in Minnesota is seemingly proving too much to bear. Estimates have potentially put that as $18 billion or more, with substantial evidence showing that funding, that additional fraud funding, is going to funding terror groups like Al-Shabaab in Somalia. We'll get onto all of that a little bit later. But somebody put up a post on X of an Ofsted report, just a screenshot of a single part of this report, highlighting that there was a Somali run daycare in Leicester that had multiple staff members on the books but had no children on the roll, and highlighting that it was a little bit suspicious. And then this is where it sent me down a rabbit hole of digging, and I wanted to present everything that I have gotten so far, which I do not believe is in any way strong enough to suggest or to accuse anyone of criminal activity. But I think there could be things in here that warrant investigation. And maybe either you guys who might know your way around research methods better than I do. I'm not a journalist, obviously. I'm a person with a microphone, a concerned citizen, basically, that's voicing his opinion and has tried as best he can to use his, average brain, should we say, to try and connect some dots that don't seem to want to line up properly. And I'm just presenting what I've gotten so far. And I feel that there needs to be potentially somebody who's either better equipped, better funded, has more time, does this for their living, has more know-how, maybe the support of a network behind them, to maybe follow up on some of the things we're going to be talking about or bringing to light in this first part of the show. So, there's a daycare. And again, just to stress one more time, I want to make it perfectly clear. that I am not accusing anybody, i.e. any person specifically, or any entity, i.e. company or anything, of criminal wrongdoing in this episode. I do not believe that I have evidence to weight that accusation, right? So there's no accusations that are being made in this episode, but this information is important for people to know, in my opinion. So the screenshot that was shared was of a daycare known as Rama Daycare that's located in Leicester. And it was a screenshot. I'll bring up the report a little bit later so you can see. In fact, I'll just skip to it right now. Highlighting that there was a daycare being run, a Somali daycare, that had 0 children on the roll at the time of the inspection. Not only 0 children in attendance, but 0 children on the roll, as you can see in this, which is on screen now. So this is literally the screenshot of the report that was shared. And I wanted to first off go and find the report to first off check that it was legit. Because obviously screenshots can be faked. Screenshots can be faked. There was an Ofsted screenshot. As you can see if I scroll up a little bit, this is from Ofsted. It's an Ofsted report. They are classified on the registers as an early years register and the compulsory childcare register for sessional daycare from the hours of 12:30 to 3:30 p.m. They've been registered since 2009. All staff in this instance holding appropriate qualifications at level 3 and above. But the person who shared this highlighted and thought, oh, well, this is a bit suspicious. And I can understand that, especially with the weight of the revelations that have been coming out of Minnesota, right? If we have this example going on in another Western country with people that are very similar to our own, and there's this documented example of mass fraud from one part of the population, why couldn't it happen in other places? Is a logical question, in my opinion. I think that's a logical question to ask. That's a question I asked myself. And that's what sent me down this rabbit hole where I want to go through everything to show that I'm not shotgunning anything here. And I want to give everybody involved, obviously, the benefit of the doubt and hopefully assume that there's nothing going on here, right? And that I'm pulling on this thread and it leads to nowhere, or in reality, I think I'm pulling on a thread and there's actually no thread to pull. But I'm not 100% sure that that is the case. So first off, I suppose, before we get into what I think is the potentially more suspect stuff, let's have a look at Rama Daycare's history in terms of their reports. Because all of their reports will be linked down below. You can find it on Ofsted. You have every single rating and report that's on there. And they've had a bit of a checkered history from what I understand. So this is the first report that was done. I'll bring it up on screen for you now. Won't be going through all of them because these reports are about 10 pages long. But this report was done in 2010, so not long after they were registered, 16th of March 2010. And basically we'll have a look at the description of the setting and how you can see how things have changed in how they operate, seemingly from past to present. We're going to go through all of the reports, just so you can see how they've trended over time. So the description of the setting, this is just it. And you can see here that the opening hours when they first started were much more expansive. Opening from each weekday from 8 a.m. to 5:45 p.m. all year. All children sharing access to a secure outdoor play area. Places were offered to parents. Places are offered according to parents' requirements. Setting currently supports children who speak English as an additional language. At the time, employing 6 staff, 5 of them holding the appropriate qualifications and 1 of them working towards their qualifications. You know, there's many instances you have apprentices. They might not hold a relevant qualification at that time. They're working towards it alongside gaining work experience. At this time, they noted that there were some steps that needed to improve the provision further. So to fully meet the specific requirements of the EYFS, the registered person, now the registered person at this time is an entity. It's an entity, I believe. I don't know if it's actually put in this report. It is here. Somali Development Service. Now, at this time, Somali Development Service was registered as a limited company. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Obtain written parental permission to seek any necessary emergency medical advice or treatment. So it's just part of the safeguarding to further improve the early years provision, the registered person should improve personalized learning, and just things that they can do to improve, right? You have it with every place. There's always things people can do to improve. This is how they started off. And obviously, when you start up something, it's not a case of you're going to get everything right from the get-go or it's going to be absolutely perfect. You know, largely you learn as you go. The next inspection did not come until 3 years later. In fact, over 3 years later, about 3.5 years later, 23rd of September, 2013. Oh, one thing to touch on, actually, in that previous thing, which I think would be important to go over. I just want to see if it actually has it in this report. Here we go. Annex A, which I think is important because when I was reading the reports initially, I struggled to understand this. How the inspectors classify it based on their numbers ruling. So this is in the same document we just looked at in the annexes, so in the appendices. Grade 1 refers to outstanding, so this aspect of the provision is exceptionally high quality. Pardon me. Grade 2 would classify it as good. Grade 3 would be satisfactory. And then grade 4 would be inadequate, not good enough, needs improvement. And as you can see, everything pretty much when they first started up was satisfactory. Everything when they first started up, completely satisfactory. So at the very least, adequate for operation. Obviously, a lot of things that could be improved. You'd like to see a lot more 2s and 1s, right? If there's a place you're going to send your child to, a daycare. But at least everything is satisfactory, right? And what you have then, they seem to get off to a very rocky start, at least from assuming that the grading system hasn't changed, the way that they structure the reports, the formatting that they have changed over time. But to their next inspection, 23rd of the 9th, 2013, the quality seemed to drop significantly, dropping from a 3 to a 4, which would render it as inadequate. And you can see here in pretty much every summary page, every summary point, it is a 4 rather than a 3. So something happened here in these 3 years that drastically reduced the quality of the output that they were putting out. How well it meets the needs of the children who attend was completely inadequate. The contribution of early years provision to the well-being of children, completely inadequate. Effectiveness of the leadership and management, completely inadequate. So some of the things that they mentioned, the educational program is not adequately monitored, resulting in a lack of depth and breadth, leading to limited challenge for children who make consistent progress. I'm not going to read through all of this, but it does indeed have some strengths. So, for example, staff work closely with parents and external services to support children who have identified special education needs. Relationships between children, parents, and staff are warm and friendly. Parents say their children, nonetheless, are happy. Needless to say, though, you cannot have this operating when it is completely inadequate. So, seemingly then, the Ofsted reporters would come back the next year, it seemed. Next year, 18th of the September, 18th of the 9th, 2014. And this would actually seemingly, for people whom were attending the daycare at this given time, right? I'm just checking to see if they had the numbers of the children on the rolls, which they do. So at this time in 2014, just flash this up on screen. At this time in 2014, they had 2 children on the roll, aging between 0 and 8, out of a total number of 50 places. And as you can see there, Somali Development Services Limited. Please do keep that in mind. So this time, this report went a lot better. So I want to give everybody a full understanding of what was going on here so they can see that I haven't shotgunned this and I've actually tried to find out this whole story of what's going on. They went from a 4 to a 2. So all of a sudden then going from extremely inadequate to strong. which is what you like to see, the provision in this instance being good. Children were motivated to learn because practitioners were skilled at following children's interests. As a result, children are continually absorbed in purposeful play and make good progress. Children are effectively safeguarded. All the things that you would like to see. Indeed, the leadership and management team making significant improvements since the last inspection. Now, you can go and find these and read all of these for yourself. If I go through every single page of every single report, it'll probably be about an hour and a half before I even get to the next part of this part of the podcast. So the overall podcast will probably be about 4-5 hours long, and I don't have that kind of time. It is not outstanding because occasionally babies and young children are not always given a broad enough range of opportunities to explore sensory play to support them and use their senses to discover, investigate, and develop their thinking skills. So always things that you can do to improve, but fair to say going from 4 to 2 is a massive improvement. And it's good to see that at the very least in the past, they have indeed had children on the roll, which is the whole point that got me to go and investigate this in the first place, was that they did not have children on the roll. On children on the roll in 2015, right? Children on the roll in, 2018. So there was another 4-year gap between the 2014 inspection and the next inspection, which would come, seemingly it seems that maybe if you have a good rank or a good record of improvement, just going from 4 to 2, they seem to give you a greater benefit. They seem to give you a greater grace period before your next reporting or your next inspection, as a matter of gaining trust, I suppose. I'm not sure if that's the way Ofsted works. I'm not saying that, but given that there was 4 years between the last report and this one, that would then imply to me that it seems that because they got such a good rank and made such good improvements last time, they sort of gained a little bit of trust, and there was a longer period of time before then the next report came in. In this instance then, they had 22, in 2018, they had 22 children on the roll at the time, aged 2 to 4, which you can see in this part, this part of the report. And this one, in this instance now, employing 4 members of staff, 3 holding the appropriate and 1 at level 3 and 1 at level 2. Presumably the level 2 is working towards a level 3, still opening from Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 5:30. This time, however, only in term time, providing funded early education for 2, 3, and 4-year-old children. So seemingly over time, they've narrowed their sort of not demographic, I suppose, but the age ranges of children that they care for. Presumably, maybe because if you have much older children with much younger children, maybe they can be, safety risks, because children, obviously, children who are much older, much bigger, can pose much greater risk to younger children. So obviously, when you're in school, for example, you have certain age groups that are on one yard, and then you have certain age groups that are on the other yard, right? So maybe that's why it was. I don't know. But it's good to see that at this time, it was nearly half full, right? Which is why I think it's important to dig through the history. It would have been very easy for me to just take that one screenshot and be like, well, look what's going on, and shotgun this. No, this establishment does seem to have a history of operating as a business in this instance, right? Now, they dropped from a 3. They dropped to a 3, however. So leaders are not fully effective in using their staff supervision systems to promote consistently good teaching. Some activities and areas of the setting are not planned or resourced well enough to enable the children, particularly slightly older children, to explore, become curious, or think critically. So they seem to take a bit of a step back here, maybe going from, 2 children to 22. Obviously, that's a massive, increase, right? Over 10x, 11x. So we can maybe chalk that up to, again, additional demand, vast numbers of children at the time of the inspection, right? Much younger age bracket, right? Maybe all of them needing a little bit more special attention, kids who are like 8 years old, maybe you could sort of leave them to be a little bit more independent and stuff like that. There's many different reasons that it could be, right? Now, we're getting into 2019 now. Pardon me. In 2019, they had 14 children at the time. They had 14 children on the roll at the time, and aging again 2 to 4. There is, in my opinion, however, an important change which would be worthy of noting. They changed from a limited to a CIC, a community interest company. Now, we'll get into a little bit of the differences between what a limited company is and what a CIC is in a little bit. But basically, the difference between a limited company and a CIC is the focus of what the company is trying to do, with CICs being community interest, focusing more around social improvements, whereas limited companies then be focused more around profits for the shareholders. That's basically what we're seeing here. Now, there are some reasons, I think, as to why this may have happened, but we'll get into those a little bit later. So you have here 14 on the books, and at this time in 2019, they went back up to a 2 again, which was good to see. They went back up to a 2. So it seems what's going on is whenever they realize that they dropped down or Ofsted has marked them down on the inspection, they actually do make an ardent effort to improve, or at least in the history they have anyway, which is really, really good to see. It's really, really good to see. That's what you want to see. You have children at these establishments. Doesn't matter my political views in the instance of how I see people of Somali background or people of other backgrounds standing in the UK and whatever. It really doesn't matter anybody's opinion on that specifically, right, when we're talking about child welfare. Right, when we're talking about child welfare in these settings. Those are kind of separate issues, right? So I think even if you say certain people shouldn't have been allowed into the country or whatever, and even that certain people should be, repatriated back to their country of ancestry or whatever, you can also say that, but then also say that you wouldn't want their daycare facilities that they have set up here and maybe operating legally here, even though you think that they shouldn't be allowed to be here for the time that they're here. You don't want children being exposed to undue danger or not being adequately safeguarded when they're in these institutions, right? I don't see an incongruity there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think you can still want to see the demographics of the country massively shifted back due to the damage that's been done and due to the betrayal of the British people that has happened with regards to mass immigration. And with the people that currently are here, especially with the children, not wanting to expose them to like undue danger and, not care about them in that way until the problem is solved. You understand the political reality, but you don't need to, you understand the political reality, but we don't need to be unduly cruel about it, especially when children are involved, right? That doesn't mean you necessarily need to be unduly cordial either. It's just, there's political reality here, but I think most people, given that most people have children themselves, will want children to be taken care of and not want any harm or anything to come to them no matter what. And if they're being entrusted to an institution, you want that institution have a trust to take care of them, basically. So it's good that they're actually making the improvements that they say they are. Then we're into the next one then that I've got is, I'll just double check, make sure there's no others then. There's one, January 2019, which is the one I believe we just looked at. And the other one then did not come. The next one did not come until 2024, July 2024. And this is where you see again, very sadly, checkered history. They dropped down to inadequate again. So inadequate in terms of quality of education, inadequate in terms of behavior and attitudes, personal development, leadership and management, all completely inadequate. Skip down here, they had 10. They had 10 on the roster at the time, 10 on roll at the time, 2 to 4 years old. And their opening hours seem to have changed quite significantly. The nursery at this time, maybe this will have to do with it, employing 5 members of childcare staff. Of these, 3 hold appropriate early years qualifications at level 3, therefore implying that 2 of them didn't. But it doesn't even specify this time whether they had the level 2 or whether they were aspiring to work towards their qualification, which I think is quite suspect. And I think you should keep that in mind when we get into some of the things a little bit later. Nursery opens from Monday to Friday during term time, sessions from 8:30 till 12:30, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and 8:30 till 11:30 on Thursday. So massively reduced their opening hours just from the morning until 12:30. Still providing the funded early education for 2, 3, and 4 years old children. There was actually a complaint that went in as well. which I think is important to have a look at. It's not one that I actually had it, but apparently they did have a complaint, and then they did take some action. So Ofsted in this one from 12th of September 2024, so not long after this report was done, on May 9th, 2024 and 26th of June 2024, I'll just see if I can bring this up on the screen now, we received concerns that the provider was not meeting the requirements relating to information and record keeping, supporting and understanding children's behavior, suitable people, safety and suitability of premises, environment, and equipment and safeguarding policies and procedures. So therefore, on the 9th of July, they carried out the inspection, found the provider was not meeting some of these requirements, as we just went through. And in fact, we might quickly revisit that report just to see what was done. We served a welfare requirements notice on 12th of July, 2024. This said a legal notice that requires the provider will take the actions below within the timescales set out. So by the 10th of July, they needed to ensure risk assessments are effective to keep children safe, particularly in relation to the supervision of children while eating and sleeping. Maybe I don't know, was there first aid that was tied in with that? When a child is eating, they're shotgunning their food, they have a good chance of choking on it. Is it that they weren't adequately trained or whatever? Don't actually know what went on. I will point out right now that I did ask Grok if any of the individuals or the entity or whatever had been linked with any of the relevant sort of criminal activity that I brought up before. So again, what are the things that we might be suspecting initially? Well, I compared it initially to something we could be seeing in Minnesota. So I asked about fraud or any other criminality. There's no evidence to suggest that. I want to point that out right now. At least from what I understand at this moment, at least from the limited research that I've been able to do, there's no evidence to suggest that. And none compelling. Anyway, stay tuned. Ensure all individuals in the provision have been subject to the required suitability checks, maybe not doing DBS, right? So that'll be by September. Ensure all staff have a knowledge of how to identify safeguarding issues. Maybe safeguarding training wasn't done. Ensure appropriate arrangements are in place to support child with whatever the acronym for SEND is. I'm assuming it's sudden something disorder, neurological disorder maybe. Ensure staff have relevant knowledge and skills to appropriately manage and support children's behavior. Quite alarming stuff. And again, it seems that they make the improvements and then they slack off. They make the improvements and they slack off. But they served this notice, and as you can see there, it was deemed as inadequate. And in fact, some of the reasons that were mentioned, I'll just quickly see if I can find them and read them off for you. There we go. So they actually have a list in this report as well. The safeguarding arrangements are not effective. There's not an open and positive culture around safeguarding that puts children's interests first. They list in a table a bunch of stuff that they have to do. Just trying to say if there's anything else. Leaders have poor oversight of the quality of the nursery. They fail to recognise or address significant breaches of requirements which impact on the quality of care and education children receive. Again, go to the links down below, ladies and gentlemen. There will be a link to the Ofsted catalogue with all of these reports. You can read all of these for yourself. Now, 10th of December, 2024, they went from inadequate to simply requires improvement. Now, I don't actually know. I'm just going to have a quick check to see if the grading system is the same. I don't think it is. I think they've changed their grading system. So at this time, they had 10 on the register, and they've gone from inadequate to still requiring improvement. So I'm assuming that's going from like a 4 to a 3. Again, they seem to have they changed their opening hours? Let me just double check. Nope, their opening hours are still the same. They have 4 members of staff this time. Of these, 1 holds appropriate early years qualifications at level 6 this time, so seem to have upgraded or at least pursued further staff qualifications to upskill them, which would maybe was one of the requirements, and then 2 at level 3. Again, what happens with the other person though? Are they a level 2? Are they not even qualified? What's going on here? So this one then, as I mentioned before, you have here requires improvement in all of them. So again, they did improve, but still a lot of things more that need improvement in all of the relevant areas. And then this was the one in question. That I mentioned to you. Remember I said this was the screenshot that somebody shared. And then they'd gone from well, in fact, the previous inspection just says requires improvement. And then the quality standards of early years provision for this inspection, it just says met. So again, I don't actually know what that means. I'm assuming then that means that maybe it's satisfactory or maybe it's strong, right? I honestly do not know, because they do list in here the provision meets the requirements, but again, you can meet the requirements, but you can supersede the requirements. That's what we saw in the grade 1 to 4 system. Why did the grading system change? It was actually really, really intuitive to help understand it. So this is what the inspector actually reviewed. So you can go and read all these. I strongly advise you do. Maybe there's some things in there that I missed that you guys can point out. That's a bit of a background. I know that's a long time, but I wanted to go through that again. So you can see that I've tried to go and find out as much as I can. Now, the one thing that is quite suspect for me that first stood out is that they started out as a limited company and then they changed to a CIC. So, given that I can be a little bit illiterate on these topics at times, I basically, if I just try and find my record a moment, asked Grok what basically the difference was, or would changing from a limited company, this is where, again, I was sort of acting on what my instinct was sort of telling me, if you will, and what I felt I should investigate or try and investigate. Would changing from a limited company to a CIC make an entity more eligible for and make it easier to receive government support in the UK? That's what I asked Grok, and Grok come back with yes, because changing from a private company to a private limited company to a community interest company can make an entity more eligible for and potentially easier to receive certain forms of government support, particularly grants and funding targeted at social enterprise. This is because CICs, I'm quoting from Grok when I'm saying this, mind. So again, that's where I'm quoting this from. This is because CICs are designed to prioritize community benefit over private profit, featuring mechanisms like an asset lock that ensures profits and assets are dedicated to social objectives, which reassures funders and aligns with this criteria for many social impact focused grants. Private limited companies, often being primarily for profit, often lack this community-focused assurance and may not qualify for funding streams reserved for social enterprises. So then that sent me down to looking at, for example, why might they have changed? And when you look at Companies House, another bit of information which has since changed since I recorded this episode yesterday, and I'll try and put the relevant segment in here now in post so that you can see the point where I was talking about this yesterday. Right, apologies about that, ladies and gentlemen. I just had to do a quick bit of reformatting, which you will see the reason why, again, I think this needs to be investigated by somebody who's better positioned to do this than myself, is that you go on Companies House and you see accounts and confirmation statements are both overdue. When you looked on Companies House, if you looked on Companies House yesterday when I recorded the episode yesterday, they would have said that their accounts and their confirmation statements were both overdue. Now, that has since changed. One thing that has since changed is their accounts for Somali Development Services, CIC. Their confirmation statement is overdue, but they have since put their accounts, and they are still in the process of going through the logging system, so they're not available yet. However, a lot of their other things are. So I went trying to find what I can. One of the things which you can find on their Companies House, right before they changed to becoming a CIC, right? So they were a limited company from 2009 was when Rama was registered. 2004, I think, if I just double check on Companies House. 2004 was when they first registered. 2009 was when Rama Daycare got registered. Right before they changed to becoming a CIC, don't know how important this is, so maybe you guys who might have an intuitive understanding a little bit better of this than I do. This was their this was one of their profit loss reports, for example. So you see their turnover and their administrative expenses was massively in the negative, especially relative to the year before. It seemed that the year before they had a profit loss of negative £4,780 for that year, 2015 to 2016. And they had then a massive downturn of a loss in this instance, after taxation, I don't think anything there was to tax really, of negative £43,050, leaving them with a balance carried forward to the next year of £47,652. But again, it seems that the only thing you could say here is that was for the year ending 31st of March 2017. Doesn't seem as though they were doing so well. And it was February 2017 that they had changed, it seems, to a CIC. That was when, if I just bring this up on screen for you again, that was when their term, going by Somali Development Services Limited, changed 19th of October 2004 to 2nd of February 2017. Again, not to say there's anything, conclusive or criminal going on here. But then, if we have a look at some of their more recent ones, it does seem that things started to look up to them. If we fast forward then to 2021 to 2022 and 2022 to 2023 for their profit loss under CIC, I'll just double check something a moment. Just want to double check something on that last document. Yeah, so when this was done, 31st of March 2017, you can see here, right, that they'd already changed to CIC, but obviously they wouldn't have been going by CIC for most of that year. So I just wanted to check that. You can see up here, Development Services CIC. So they'd already changed it there already because we're in March and they changed from limited company in February. This now, 2022 to 2023 and 2021 to 2022, is looking a lot rosier. So you can see their balances carried forward for 2021 to 2022 is actually in the positive. 19,846 in 2021 to 2022, and that actually further went up to 22,119, right, in 2022 to 2023. Okay, so they changed to a CIC, and then in the years afterwards, things seem to get a lot better. If you have a look in the next year, right, things seemed to plateau with this one, with a balance carried forward of 99, right? As we mentioned, in this year, 2024, the one that we looked at, there were no children enrolled at the time of the inspection, and their hours have been drastically decreased. So they had a much, much smaller turnover, but positive turnover nonetheless. So, what might have colored their decision to change to a CIC when we're looking at social projects, community projects, some that can be focused around health, for example, and others? So when we're having a look at this now, one of the things that, again, Grok was able to find for me, and then I was able to go and verify because I managed to find the spreadsheets. All of this information, I want to stress, by the way, everything that I've showed you, no Freedom of Information Act requests, no need to go to any other source other than the internet. You can find this just if you have an internet connection yourself. So that's where I want to be perfectly clear. There's nothing in here that I'm revealing. There's no whistleblower that's come forward. There's, again, no Freedom of Information Act requests, nothing like that. This is all stuff that is freely, publicly available. The Ofsted reports, the reports on Companies House, the spreadsheets from Asset Publishing, which I'm going to go through in a moment, all of this is publicly available. So, what actually seemed to happen? Well, one of the things that seemed to happen, the decision, it would seem, to change to a CIC managed to get them access to some limited sources of funding. So, I just want to show this. This is from their website. And these are some of their funders. I'm going to move myself out of the way slightly just to make sure that you can see it all. These are some of their funders. I'm not sure if you can see that one on the end. So the one on the end is the Community Fund, which seems to be tied in with the European Union. You have the Heritage Fund. You have the Community Foundation for Leicestershire and Rutland, Ministry of Justice, Police and Crime Commissioner for Leicestershire. What appears to be I can't quite read that. The logo is very small, but Positive Futures, it seems, tied in with the EU. I'll just zoom in slightly to see if I can see it, but the formatting of the website's gone off. The Skills Funding Agency. I'm not sure if you can see that at the bottom of the page there. Skills Funding Agency, as well as the Violence Reduction Network and what appears to be His Majesty's government, the National Lottery Community Fund. So, quite a lot of partners. That helps me to talk about one of the ones which I wasn't actually able to verify with at least the link that Grok gave me, but given it's one of their partners, one of their funders, I can assume that at least Grok was correct in one of the things that he told me. So, some of the things that they have received 2017 to 2018, right after they turned into a CIC, they received from the Leicestershire Police and Crime Commissioner, according to Grok, £9,650, part of the Safer Together project, aimed at engaging up to 200 young people aged 11 to 19 identified as at risk, I don't know. I think, again, is it normal for police crime commissioners to, would it be normal for police and crime commissioners to award that kind of money to a daycare that deals with 2 to 4 year olds? I don't know, but according to Grok, that's one of the things that they received. And seeing that one of their funders is indeed the Leicester Police and Crime Commissioner, I can assume at least that one is fairly legitimate. The ones that I can show you in a moment, though, are 2 payments or 2 awards from the UK government's CCLF, right? And also the Leicestershire and Rutland Integrated Health Board, which is part of the NHS, and I'll go through what those are in a moment. In 2024, despite Grok telling me that the CCLF had actually, I believe, closed applications in October 2023, an annual evaluation or an evaluation report published in August 2025 highlighted its impact on maintaining services like food banks, mental health support, community hubs, which is presumably what this would have been used for. They have some, in some of their reports, which you can find on their website, look it down below, you can find images of these food banks and all of the stuff that they're involved in. You have the CCLF, which is the Community Organisations Cost of Living Fund, a £76 million UK government initiative launched in July 2023 as part of a broader £101.5 million voluntary community and social enterprises cost of living programme. It's administered by the National Lottery Community Fund on behalf of the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, right? So this is coming to them directly from the government. They were awarded £67,592.95 from this fund. And I can show that to you. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. For some reason, it wasn't initially coming up and I had to do some extra little bit of gerrymandering. So I hope that you can see this when it comes on screen in a moment. This is the spreadsheet. And up the top, it is actually dated 29.9.24. 29.9.24. Presumably that means 24th of September 2024. And you can see here, it should be highlighted right about the middle. Somewhere right about the middle, it should be highlighted. You can follow my cursor if not. Somali Development Services, CIC, £67,592.95 in the East Midlands. Then there were also several other Somali organisations that were also awarded funding. So you had Somali Adult Social Care Agency, $14,987. Had the Somali Advice Link, $22,152. You had the Somali Family Learning and Regeneration Project, $25,640. Somali Integration and Development Association, 15,932. All of this adding up to well over, 120 odd thousand thereabouts, because you have 30,000, about 30,000 if you combine these two, say 29,000. You have 89,000 if you add those two together. Then you have 99,109. Yeah, so you're looking at about £145,000 between all of these different organizations from one fund alone. Now, again, important to note out, it's not just these things that they are funding, by the way. Obviously, you have things just like Society Links Tower Hamlets, but you also then have things like the Sikh Women's Aid, Siri Guru Gobind Singh Ji, whatever this means, Sikh Community Centre. So there's other things which they fund as well. But that's that loan, or, well, maybe not loan, grant, whatever it is, at least corroborated. So there was another one, as I mentioned, that they received. There was another one that I mentioned that they received in June 2025, it seemed, from, again, the Integrated Care Board, part of the NHS. And that'll be coming up on screen for you in a moment because, again, publicly available, there's a spreadsheet which you can go and find as well. So if you have a look, this one should hopefully be a lot easier to see. At least I certainly hope so anyway. This one should be a fair bit easier to see. You have this one. It'll be right in the middle. And I'll just quickly tab on over to it. Somali Development Services, CIC, 28,196 awarded to them. If we just scroll over, Mental Health Services is the expense area. So clinical and medical clinical other in terms of expense. 30th of the 6th, 2025 from NHS, Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland ICB. So again, another one of these corroborated. So they have received a lot since becoming a CIC, a lot of this aid that I don't know if they were receiving before, or the lot. I suppose what I feel is a relatively logical question to ask is that did they become a CIC for this reason? Did they become a CIC thinking then that they could then get greater access to government funds? Now, I don't know, based on some of the reports, it might seem that they had public funding before. And on some of these reports, it will show that a lot of their funding has been public funding. The reason why I think this is quite important to take into account, though, is the last part of this now, which I realize I've been on this topic for a while, but I think it's important to try and be as thorough as I can, right? Is that if you have a look, this is where I think, again, why I think that why it warrants investigation, particularly maybe with regards to these ones that they've recently received, is when you have a look at some of their forms, which these are termed confirmation statements. Confirmation statement this year is one of the forms which at time of recording, it might have changed since recording or before this episode goes out. It might have changed. In fact, I'll refresh the page right now to see where we are, to see if it's changed right now. Might have changed? Nope. Just refresh the page. It's still overdue. The last statement they done was dated 24th of November, 2024, according to Companies House. There's a trend with these confirmation statements, which there's something different about the most recent one that they filed. This is one that they filed in 2016, back when they were a limited company. I'll just bring this up on screen for you in just a moment. Back when they were a limited company, they filed... Oh, I got to quickly reformat. Okay, right, page reformatted. These are their confirmation statements. These are their confirmation statements. So you have this one that was dated 11th of the 11th, 2016, Somali Development Services Limited, and these are just, statements saying persons with significant control, the company has identified a registrable person in relation to the company, but all the required particulars of that person have not been confirmed. They do have a report on there as well, on Companies House, which you can find, which lists all of the ones that are on there. Some of them have since resigned. I can confirm that all information required to be delivered by the company to the registrar in relation to the confirmation period concerned either has been delivered or is being delivered at the same time as the confirmation statement. That's literally all this is, an authorization. This form is authorized by one of the following: director, secretary, person authorized, charity commission, receiving CIC manager. So these are just saying that it's been authenticated, basically. And this is something they seemingly have to file every single year. And they have been doing it. They have been doing it. And it follows this constant format. The others are only 3 pages long because there's not the authorization. There's the authorization page, but there's not the actual the bit about the different persons that need to be confirmed. So this time, when they're CIC, they registered it, or they put in their confirmation statement received for filing in electronic format on the 21st of November the next year. Somali Development Services, CIC. There's the confirmation statement, and there is the authorization. And what I'll do is I'll just quickly show for each of these now, just the first page to show that they've been doing it pretty much year on year on year, all the different times. So there's this one then for 2018. They've then got the next one for 2019. And you can see nothing really out of the ordinary. All of them registered with Companies House. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? Seemingly at these points, they were managing to make them on time. There's some discrepancies in the months and whatever else that they've actually filed them on, but all of them coming right around in October of each year, right? And is received for filing in electronic format. In this instance, they said the confirmation state date was the 19th of the 10th, 2020. Obviously going right into lockdown around this time, or we'll soon be going into full-fledged lockdown, or yeah, well into lockdown at this point, aren't we? So received for filing 20th of the 12th, 2020. And they follow this trend. There's a couple more, ladies and gentlemen. This one then filed 24th of the 11th, 2021, which I believe falls still before their date based on the one that they had to be deadline for, based on the one they're overdue currently. And just quickly check when that date is. So according to Companies House, the statement was due by 8th of December. Statement was due by 8th of December 2025. So that was 2021 that we just done. Then it seems that they were filing this one in 2022, 24th of the 11th. So they've been consistent. They've been really consistent, it seems. And everything seems to be above board. All of the confirmation statements and the authorizations are there. We've gone from 2016 to 2023. Nothing wrong. Nothing wrong in their confirmation statements. Then we get to 2024. They filed this one with Companies House, right? They filed this one with Companies House, but it's not like the others. There's a qualifier on it. The qualifier on it for this confirmation statement, ladies and gentlemen, the company confirms that its intended future activities are lawful. Why do they have to say that? We've been through all of the confirmation statements that are publicly available, mind you. Every single one of these bits of information is publicly available, right? In fact, I'll show you just so you can see. Just so you can see, right? You can go on to Companies House, as I've shown you, and you can go into, just quickly bring it up on screen for you. You can go into their filing history. You might have seen a slight jump cut there, ladies and gentlemen, because I realized that I hadn't cropped it properly. I hadn't formatted my feature properly. I hadn't formatted my window properly. So here we go. This then is, again, you can find all this on Companies House. Every bit of it. Just move me over here a little bit. Every bit of it completely as part of the public record. So as I said, I have not unearthed anything that is not already publicly available in this, which is why I don't think that really there's any, reason why we can't talk about this, or bring this to light. But it's a bit weird how you had confirmation statements, confirmation, for this company, even after it turned to a CIC, then they have to do this when they do their one in 2024, and they seem in the September to have received this massive grant, and it might not be down to that. It might not be down to that. I don't know. So I think that there's smarter people who are more equipped in this area to investigate this, who are more able to maybe dig into the weeds of this stuff and find out what's going on than me. But then in their final confirmation statement, which they filed last year, they had to confirm that its intended future activities are lawful. That qualifier there implies that something was unlawful. Maybe not even deliberately. Maybe not even deliberately. Right? That, I think, warrants some scrutiny and some investigation. And I wanted to go through all that, ladies and gentlemen. You can see I have not shotgunned this. I've spent hours of my life that I'll never get back trying to find out what's been going on, because I feel that this is extremely important. If, and I want to be crystal clear with my language, if there is something which there's no conviction or no allegation or anything like that to imply that these individuals that run Somali Development's CIC, Somali Development Services CIC, are involved in any of the kind of similar criminal activity that we've seen Somalis doing in Minnesota. But if there is, people need to know about it, right? And if it is the case where it is like in Minnesota, where the government knows about it and they don't want to do anything about it, seemingly in this instance, putting them on the paper, maybe they did do something about it, maybe something happened and they did maybe have the frighteners put up them. I don't know. I don't know. If that isn't the case, and I'm pulling on this thread and it leads to nowhere because nothing shady is going on, then that's also a good thing, because it means that, you know, these community grants and the taxpayer money, the public money that these people are receiving seems to actually be going to ostensibly good causes. That's a good thing. Worst case scenario, it could be being funneled out and being used to fund terror groups, as has been seen in Minnesota. Here's Stephen Crowder highlighting that the Minnesota taxpayer, as I've covered this video before, is one of the premier funders of the Al-Shabaab terror network.
Oh, so really the only thing that people like Ilhan Omar and her ilk think America doesn't need is Americans. Ever notice that? Here's another fast fact for you that's kind of fun. Millions of dollars were stolen from Minnesota taxpayers, and it was funneled to Somalia to fund the Al-Shabaab terror group. Yeah, according to, there's one source here speaking to City Journal, the largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. Also, let's add up, hey, you need them. You know who needs these Somalis?
So again, even though crystal clear, I want to make it crystal clear, I am not bringing any accusations, allegations, or anything of the sort, right, towards, in this instance, Somali Development Services, CIC, or any of the people that have been involved in it and are presently still involved in it, because I don't have any direct evidence to suggest that. I do think that there is potential reason for investigation based on their kind of checkered history of their operation, based on all of their history, which seems to, in their confirmation statements, be all above board. But now recently, coinciding with the report where there were no children present at the venue, their opening hours have massively decreased. They're changing to a CIC, potentially to access more public support at a time when their profit loss margins were not great whatsoever. And right around the time they receive massive government support in the form of a £67,500 grant, that in their confirmation statement for that same year, they have to clarify, to quote the report, the company confirms that its intended future activities are lawful. There's implications there. which is why I think it needs to be investigated. Maybe you guys who are in my audience will be more equipped to handle this. I don't know whether maybe you guys are good with like open source intelligence or maybe better at fielding through reports than me, and maybe have more time. There's guys out there that can do this with the backing of a network and can actually reach out for comment or whatever. I don't know. But I think this is important. I think that this is a thread that needs to be pulled on, and I'm hoping leads to nowhere. I'm hoping it leads to nowhere. Right? Because it's not going to change the political reality with regards to wider political realities we need to talk about. But if there is more things going on than meets the eye, well, that needs to be talked about. That needs to be shone light on as well. So maybe, I don't know, based on this, which you guys can find everything linked down below, and maybe share this clip, I don't know. But hopefully someone with more resources, a network behind them, insurance, lawyers, which is none of what I have, right? I'm a guy with a microphone. But I can follow a thread. It just all depends on how far my capacities can go to try and unveil it. And there's people out there that are a lot more qualified and a lot more educated than me to maybe pursue this. And I want to reiterate, I hope that it leads to nowhere. I hope it leads to nowhere. So that's where that stands, ladies and gentlemen. That's an hour on this. An hour just to get through this, because I feel it's so important to go through the backstory, to go through the history, to go through the records, all of which are publicly available. So you can see that it's not just a screenshot and I shotgunned a conclusion from it, but there's a lot more here that I think needs to be investigated and that I'm hoping will turn up nothing. On to the next story, on to the next big thing. So that's where that stands at the moment. This is, however, something that is a little bit different, but we're going to talk about some scientific studies now, which I think is quite interesting. Some studies that are broken with regards, which is quite damning again, to a study that came out this year in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, headed up by a researcher called Ardavan Koshnood, and with researchers Sundquist and Sundquist. They published an article, which is open access. You can find it down below. Immigrant Background and Rape Conviction, a 21-year follow-up study in Sweden. Sweden, with some of the other research that they cite, being one of the rape capitals per capita of Europe. So we have this article, which they cite in some of their supporting references. This is a graph courtesy of Eurostat in this instance, showing the per capita rates of rape across different countries in Europe from 2013 to 2017. And you can see Sweden is right up there with us. Sweden is right up there with us with about 60, 65 or so per 100,000 inhabitants for the years 2013 to 2017, right? Reports are a little bit different, which is in the same publication, by the way. I'll just quickly skip up and get that graph on screen for you now. There's some reports, however, which, again, reports, I think, more so highlights people's faith that their actual allegation or whatever is actually going to be followed up on. The number of reports is not necessarily the number of, like, true claims, if you will. It's not the number of rapes, obviously. But if you have high numbers of reports, I would like to think that that means that the people have good faith that their police and that their forensic, their government is actually going to try and investigate to get to the truth, to bring the perpetrator to justice, right? What you see is when in places like Britain, for example, these rape capitals of the world, it dread to think how many rapes now go unreported because of our history of not prosecuting them and not trying to pursue them, usually because it's inconvenient to do so from a political correctness perspective due to the race, the ethnicity, the religion oftentimes, and these community issues in a lot of cases, that a lot of the high profile cases, for example. with certain demographics being massively overrepresented in stats, it makes it a lot less advantageous from a political standpoint to try and go and pursue them. So then when malpractice and justice is not done, people then feel, well, what's the point? I got raped. What's the point in reporting it? So then reports are going to go down. And then people will use that, crony politicians will use that to say, well, rape reports are down. That doesn't necessarily mean that the number of rapes are down. You've got rapes occurring every single hour in London on average, right? I think that's still in date anyway. That was a BBC article that came out a good while ago with that headline, a really, really shocking one, right? But yet they'll try to say that, oh, rape reports are down, all these different reports are down. Not only do you oftentimes not report them in the first place, but how many people are not going to come forward because they don't think the government's going to do anything about it? In this instance, Netherlands and France and Luxembourg and Sweden at the top. And I think you can see that hours are down here. Hours are a lot lower. Now, it could be, you could think, well, less reports, less crime, right? Correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. However, and like I said, sometimes you can have very little reports, but a lot of the crime happening because sometimes the victims don't want to come forward, especially when they feel that the government and the police are not going to have their back, because in many instances, police and government have been directly implicated in the crimes. So, what did they find is the most important thing, however, in this 21-year follow-up study in Sweden. So what they done was they analysed 4,032 individuals who were convicted for one of the following crimes, which comes under the classification that they gave Rape Plus. So the Rape Plus classification was given to crimes that encompassed rape, attempted rape, and then aggravated rape and attempted aggravated rape. So the differences between aggravated rape and rapist for the purposes of this study, maybe it says it in the methods, I'll just double check it now. Sometimes you have other monikers coming in to describe these things like sexual assault and stuff like that, but they umbrella classified not only rape, but attempted rape, and then also this aggravated rape and aggravated attempted rape as well, looking for time period 2000 to 2020, so very recent. Very, very recent. So it's a case control study. They matched it with about 20,160 matched controls, right? And using the regression models to determine the relationship between immigrant background and rape plus convictions, they were also able to adjust for several confounding variables. So things like socioeconomic status, substance use disorders, psychiatric disorders, criminal behavior, those kinds of things, and to see what may be a good predictor of if a person was going to be one of the people that would be implicated and be convicted of one of these crimes. What you did find is that criminal behavior in itself was a good predictor that one of these convicted would be, based on prior criminal behavior, would be one of the people then that would be convicted of rape or one of these other charges. So, what did they find? What did they find? Well, they found that 36.9% of the convicted individuals were Swedish-born with Swedish-born parents, two Swedish-born parents. So they were born in Sweden to parents who were born in Sweden. Now, that does not mean that the person was Swedish, because they did not, as far as I'm aware, in this study, control the two things they did not control for were specific ethnicity and also any religion, right? Whether it's because it's just something they couldn't account for or maybe other reasons, right? I don't know. But they found that 36.9% of the convicted individuals and then about 70% of the controls were Swedish-born to two Swedish-born parents. What does that mean? Well, that means that the remaining 63.1% were of immigrant background, with either one parent being born outside Sweden, both parents being born outside Sweden, or them being born outside Sweden themselves and immigrating to Sweden at some point. That's astonishing. Nearly two-thirds. Right, similar parallels with other data like Operation Stovewood. This was confined to women 18 years and older, but again, you look at Operation Stovewood, you had, 64% of the cases, in this case of child sexual abuse and exploitation, being committed by a certain demographic, only responsible for about 3% of the population. This is astonishing. It's astonishing. really has credibility to things like Steve Laws and stuff like that was saying, even though he says it in a lot more, do you want to say unsophisticated terms and stuff like that? When he was on Liam Tufts, and he said, well, no, it's the younger generations. It's like the second and third generations that are going around in stab gangs and rape gangs and stuff like that. Well, whether they were cherry-picked, these individuals, I don't know. It wouldn't get approved, and it certainly wouldn't get peer-reviewed unless they'd done some kind of random sampling, right? To the best of our knowledge, no previous study has examined potential co-founders with the aforementioned predictors, as well as importance in the association between immigration status and rate plus, which will be done in the current study. We also hypothesized a certain lack of acculturation and integration are important contributing factors, and these associations are included in subgroups and covariates that may reflect a person's acculturation and integration into the society. So the methods, they went through a database selecting all individuals convicted of rape plus against a woman between 2000 and 2020 who were between 15 and 60 years old. The lower cut point of 15 years of age was selected since a person is not legally responsible for a crime committed in Sweden before the age of 15. The upper limit was restricted because we only had access to individuals to data on individuals born 1958 and younger. So they just took all of the cases. So there we go. Case control. They just took all of the cases. And this is how it broke down, ladies and gentlemen. This is how the actual data itself broke down. So on the left of this table, which will be coming up on screen in a moment, is let me just crop it down, is the case, and then the other side is the control. The population matched controls. So what did they find? It's absolutely shattering for the diversity and the globalists. So this is the table giving the breakdown that we just saw, the results. Born in Sweden, two Swedish-born parents. Doesn't necessarily mean that means that they're a Swedish person, but it would mean that they would be so it wouldn't be that their parents immigrated, it would be that their grandparents immigrated. So that would be, third generation, potentially? So you had here 50% of the cases were people outside of Sweden alone. And then you had the remaining 12.5%, right, in this instance, being made up of people who either had one parent born outside of Sweden or another parent born outside Sweden, or two parents born outside of Sweden. What is particularly of note is this one here. 1,375 cases, 34.1%, born outside of Sweden and arrived 15 years or older. I wonder why. You had about 16.5% who were born outside of Sweden, but arrived less than 15 years of age. The next one above that is 17.7%. They were born outside of Sweden and spent less than 10 years in Sweden. And even nearly 10% who were year from 5 to 10. And people who spent less than 5 years in Sweden, they made up 23%. Come to a place, have no respect for it, right? People who have more respect for it start to challenge authority. Males going through puberty, full of testosterone, started to adjust to their male bodies, right? Come to a place you have seemingly no respect for and you commit heinous crimes. Are we really surprised? Another big thing, so you can see that social welfare was potentially a big predictor. Criminal activity, 52%, revolved in prior criminal activity, right? 13% suffering from psychiatric disorders, drug use. All of these things can play a role. However, for the people that want to go on about equality and inequalities cause this and all of this stuff, they actually say as well in the abstract, our findings reveal a strong link between immigrant background and rape convictions that remains after statistical adjustment. Mechanisms behind the overrepresentation of individuals with an immigrant background among those convicted needs further exploration. Maybe. Is it necessarily worth keeping those people in the country? Really? when pretty much all Europeans across their countries have said no to this level of immigration repeatedly, and politicians have said, fuck you. It's really the need for the people in Sweden to explore the reasons why, whilst they still got to deal with the problem. After adjusting for potential confounders, these odds decreased but remained significant. So the socioeconomic factors, substance use disorders, psychiatric disorders, even criminal behavior, all of this stuff, were not enough to completely offset the nature of the relationship between immigrant background and rape convictions. That's very damning for those who want to blame it on income inequality, want to play the game of cultural relativism, all of this stuff, that we're all the same, want to just say that it's because of they needed another youth club, right? Or they needed clean needles for their meth or whatever, for their heroin. It's because they were poor. It wasn't enough to offset the nature of the relationship or account for it. Maybe there's just certain differences. And maybe that's the thing that needs to be reckoned with. Again, you know what initiative that supports, especially when it comes to Britain. Now, there was another study which I wanted to go over a little bit quick, just a bit of the results section of this study in particular. It's called the relation between crime and immigration, unemployment and income inequality in European countries, social issues and policy implications, by Kochia, Kohn and Kaka, right? But in their results section, they actually done for sexual violence, for homicide, theft, GDPPC, which I believe is gross domestic product per capita, is what I believe that they've classified this as. Yep. So in their analysis, they done both a regression analysis and a correlation analysis. What you actually found with the correlation analysis is that the sexual violence rate is significantly positively correlated with immigration. Now, it's a small correlation, 0.2, right? So it's not like a perfectly linear correlation, which you get if you had a positive value of 1, right? So the way correlations work, just keeping it nice and simple, and is how I understand it anyway from my limited experience doing stats when I was in uni, positive linear correlation is basically straight up like this. So both of the relationship between the variables is perfectly linearly correlated. If you then end up with like 0.9, it just means that it's still positive, but it's not quite fully going up at like that 45-degree angle. 0.2 would be like somewhere down here. So I'm just trying to figure out how I would illustrate on here. I'm just trying to make sure it goes the right way. So is it up that way? It might be the other way for you guys if you're doing the graph like this. I don't know how to really describe it. It's going up and to the right from the origin point in a straight line would be a positive linear correlation. Negative would be the opposite. It'd be coming down from the top corner down to the bottom. That would be an inverse relationship. So it's small in terms of its actual correlation, its actual slope, degree of its slope, but still significant. And also associated apparently with GDP per capita, which I think is quite interesting. Don't think that necessarily means that more sexual, it might be a case of, I don't know, you'd get the idea that more gross domestic product per capita leads to more sexual violence, which I don't know if that actually bears out. That's where you get correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, right? But it's actually negatively associated with unemployment and income inequality, which I thought was quite interesting. The regression analysis makes this a little bit simpler to understand. When we're looking at an examination of sexual violence, indicates that a 1% increase in income inequality, and I'll bring this up on screen if I can. Here we go. This is the PDF of the study, so you can find the link down below and you can go view the PDF from the website. This is another open access paper, by the way. Both of these papers are open access. So this is the regression analysis, because it puts it in a little bit more simpler terms to understand with what their results section showed. So 1% increase in income inequality reduces sexual violence by 3.2%. It's a little bit weird. Again, you're seeing that inverse correlation there. So we say more income inequality reduces expected sexual violence. That indicated like more prosperity in the natural hierarchical fashion of the way that, you know, things tend to manifest in human societies that have prospered, right? That things tend to get better. Bit weird. That's controlling for immigration. And a 1% increase in immigration increases the expected sexual violence by about 0.3%, which is very still significant, still reach statistical significance when controlling for income inequality. So for sexual violence, the model's R-squared value indicates that about 42% of this variation within this crime can be attributed linearly to income equality and immigration. However, it's all good to say, we do actually have our own data to show that certain peoples within our nations, which we can hypothesize, given that Sweden has very much the similar problems that the UK has, right, literally being neck and neck with them in terms of the per capita rape rate at the time the Eurostat data came in that we went over earlier, maybe we'd hypothesize that maybe their data would look quite similar to ours, such as what you might see from this graph by Restore Britain, for example, which I've covered before, and I've showcased this graph before. It's a very, very important and pivotal one. I often come back and reference it. Pulls on data from the Centre of Migration Control, which I will go to after this, and a boom. This is sexual offences in London by nationality. Top ones being Afghanistan, Eritrea, Algeria, Somalia, Sudan, I believe. I'm looking at the previous screen, so a little bit small. Algeria, Somalia, Sudan, Albania, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, Morocco, Kenya, Romania, Bangladesh, Bulgaria, Sri Lanka, Jamaica, Ukraine, Pakistan, Ghana, Trinidad and Tobago, Turkey, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, India, Colombia, Ecuador, St. Lucia, Portugal, Netherlands, Belgium, Poland, Lithuania, Brazil, Nepal, Latvia, Sierra Leone, Angola, France, and finally then you get to British. 6.5 charged per 10,000. In contrast to Afghanistan, 74.17 charged per 10,000. And I want you to know, the Rupert Lowe gets called all these names. People who work for Restore Britain get called all these names. They get called far right, they get called fascists, they get called liars, all this stuff. Centre for Migration Control data bears this out. The top 10 that we just witnessed, for example, which I'll bring up on screen for you now as well. They absolutely... Oh, that didn't want to do that. There we go. They absolutely bear this out. So this is directly from the source which they reference, Centre for Migration Control. You can see Afghanistan, Eritrea, Algeria, Somalia, Sudan, Albania, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, and Morocco, going from 74.17 to 25.56. Serious problems, folks. Serious problems that it seems people still don't want to admit the solution for. And it's not just this either. The other thing we've got to take into account is it's not just, rape and sexual assault rates and those kinds of things, which are a massive problem, and potentially even homicide rates and murders and stuff like that. Say his name is Wayne Broadhurst. There's another one here, which is another one that's important to take into account from the Department of Work and Pensions, also cited by Restore Britain, that, again, why we've got to understand why things like Rape Plus and all of those things are spiking and whatever else, and why it's 2/3 massively higher in immigrant populations and stuff like that. Can we have a look at the cost of interpretation by translation services for benefit claimants, which go into nearly into the tens of millions? They go nearly into the tens of millions? About 9.5 million for 2024 to 2025? Just on interpretation and translation? Just saying that it's from the Department of Work and Pensions for benefits? So NHS translation costs, court translation costs, all of these other things on top of it, this is going to be obviously much, much, much higher. Given that Sweden data, again, not saying that every person who's of an immigrant background can't speak English, obviously, but we've seen in many instances when it's been reported in the news, stories that you hear coming out, fucking hell, towards the end of last year, they were coming out every single day. The seemingly person in the dock needed a bloody interpreter. How much is it actually costing us? Is it possible to fucking know? Why do we need it? Nobody asked for it. That's just the reality, unfortunately. Nobody asked for it. Nobody asked for it. Viktor Orban certainly didn't ask for it, and he's actually been relatively staunch in his opposition to it and actually calling out the root cause of it rather unapologetically and actually putting somebody on the world stage that certainly the secular EU doesn't want on the world stage, right? himself, I believe, being a Reformed Calvinist, if I'm not mistaken. Kind of interesting, given that a lot of Europe is predominantly Catholic in terms of their faith, and the Pope saying that, you know, Christ would identify with the asylum seekers and the immigrants and so on. Viktor Orban putting the Lord straight and front and center of Hungary being a bulwark against these invasions. I can't help but agree with him. Poland being very much the same. Poland being very, very strong in their Catholic faith, and even Cardinal Sarah being on the record before saying that you're Poles first, then you're Catholic, then and only then you classify yourselves as European. You never forget who you are in terms of your blood first, and then you choose to follow Christ. All right? If that's a personal choice, obviously. Miriam Cates asked Mr. Orban in one of his conferences in Budapest. They were actually, GB News were actually the only UK broadcaster to be able to gain access to this. And this is what Mr. Orban had to say on whether mass migration in Western Europe had doomed Western Europe to decline.
Thank you. Miriam Cates, GB News. And Prime Minister, you've said that we are living through the end of the liberal world order, and certainly current events in Venezuela and Greenland and Ukraine would confirm that. But in those events, we're also increasingly seeing Europe completely sidelined. We're now just observers, not actors anymore. Now, you've also said that there is a route back to a strong Europe through a patriotic takeover of power in Brussels and a return to national sovereignty. But for Western European countries like the UK and France and Germany, where mass migration has so changed our populations, do you really believe that there is a democratic route back to patriotism, or are our nations doomed to decline?
Let's express our gratitude to the Lord that we've been able to stay away from this. So I agree with every single word of the new national security strategy of the US, that Europe actually brought in itself such a calamity that actually threatens with the end of its civilization. It's called migration, and the fact that Hungary managed to stay away from this, well, how we managed, it's really a miracle. And I'm not only just praising my own house, as we say in Hungary, because I know how we stayed out of this in 2015 when the whole mass migration started, and we had to say yes or no. Everybody was saying yes. We were the only ones to say no. And we had a price to pay, and we paid the price because Hungary has been punished for this. Hungary has been accused because of this. I think unjustly accused. But Hungary persevered, and it is quite clear that now we opted for the winning choice. And what I'm expecting is that in the next coming 10, 15 years, there's going to be a substantial requirement from Western Europe, not migrants, indigenous Europeans, using the right of free travel and free movement to come and work and live in Hungary. I count on that.
Completely unapologetic. Completely unapologetic. Putting the Lord on the world stage and saying that it's actually thanks to the Lord, right, that we have actually staved off this invasion. It's called migration, right? Pope evidently must be absolutely fuming, right? Not to mention Ursula von der Leyen and all the other cronies in the EU who are fining Hungary to the tunes of millions of euros every single day for not accepting and turning themselves into Sweden, right? Not turning themselves into Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Sodom and Gomorrah being a cautionary tale, right, of what happens when evil gets so bad, right? Of the kind of stuff that can befall you when you allow your society to get so evil and so depraved, right? Go and read the bits about Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis. It's you know, if you have a vivid imagination like I do, it's kind of a hard read, right? You know, there's no lengthy descriptions or anything like that, but if your mind is good at filling in the gaps, it's like, ooh. Not to mention some of the other ones as well about what happened to Lot and the others and that whole ordeal. But just like, that's a little bit later, and some of the stories that come in Judges and the rest of it, it's kind of can be stomach turning at times. But hey, it's history, right? And saying that you know, we actually welcome, you know, people come to work in Hungary and stuff like that. I'm not saying that he is necessarily completely against immigration, but he has been stern and strong in keeping his people safe from the waves of migration and colonization and usurpation that have been deliberately inflicted on other European countries by the EU. And he's chosen to stand there to be the defense of his people, as the leader should. As the leader should. For his people. So what successive generations of British politicians have not done, in many instances selling the British people out, stabbing them in the back repeatedly, and then calling them all different names because they dared to be angry about it and they dared to even notice at times. Leaders in France have done it. Germany have done it. Sweden have done it. Norwegians in, I think, the next 20 years could stand to be a minority in their country, right? Norwegians have done it. Sweden being the country that essentially sold out Salwan Momika and sentenced him to death. You know, not legitimately, obviously, but essentially for his activism. He suffered the ultimate price for it. No doubt he knew the risks that it could impose, but did the Swedish government choose to protect him? No. No, it was after one of these attacks, whether it's Salwan Momika, whether it's the 7/7 bombings, or whether it is Ariana Grande concert, all of these different things, whether it's Lee Rigby, all of this stuff is, don't look back in anger, diversity is our strength, we've got to be tolerant, all of this stuff. No. No. Luckily that migration has brought biblical level plagues on us. And there's a section in Deuteronomy about that. So no doubt Mr. Orban would likely have familiarized himself with. It's Deuteronomy 28, for those who are wondering. It's also hinted a little bit in Leviticus as well. I think it's Leviticus 26, if I'm not mistaken. But Deuteronomy 28 lays out exactly what has happened in Western nations, almost as if it is a play-by-play commentary, but it was written, 4,000, 5,000 years ago? Very, very prophetic indeed. If you remember what it is for, it also presents the beginning of the solution. A lot of people who tout their Christian credentials also not recognize, the reality of the British people exist. They are such a thing as the British people as well, and will not recognize, the importance of demographics and those kinds of things. And that there is indeed a genocide taking place against the British people, one that is being perpetuated by themselves with things like abortion and stuff like that, but one that is also being perpetuated by Malthusians in government. So both of them need to be addressed. We need to stop killing ourselves and then stop letting our politicians kill us and replace us as well. Orban knows that. Orban knows that. It must be nice to have a leader that really cares about you, eh? Must be nice to have a leader that really cares about you. Be like Hungary, be a little bit more like Poland, right? Be less like us, be less like Sweden, be less like the rest of Europe. And the censorship and all the rest of it is only going to get worse and worse and worse, which I should be listening to my WRONGSPEAK series. The WRONGSPEAK series, deep dive into 1984, will be imperative for understanding likely more and more of the legislation that's going to be coming out of the EU, which if Starmer is anything to go by, he's trying to backdoor us back into, right? He's been backdoored by his rent boys, now he's trying to backdoor us back into the EU, right? So if you want to understand the kind of things that we're dealing with and the kind of regime that awaits us and is being built and does await us, the communist China would make 1984 blush. But if you want to understand a lot of the systems behind it, and a lot of the natural thought processes that you might have been indoctrinated into if you went through the public school system and all of these things, make sure you go and listen. Make sure you go and listen to the WRONGSPEAK series. If you want to get access to 3 and 4 ahead of time, they're actually in the members areas, and you can actually get them if you're a supporter on Buy Me a Coffee. You can get them in Patreon, locals, and they'll be coming out on Spotify. Episode 3 this Sunday, and then episode 4 a week Sunday. Stay tuned for my video coming on Animal Farm as well. It's in the works. Just finished rereading the book and making my notes and stuff, so I was hopefully going to get working on that tonight, but probably not going to get working on that tonight now. I'll probably be working on that tomorrow. Okay. Last couple of things now. Do you remember the lady that, I don't actually know how to pronounce his name that much, I think it's Schleur Powell, the Reform candidate that was standing in Caerphilly, I believe. There was a lady that was described by Wales Online and other journalistic outlets and other people as a mum and son, concerned mum, Caerphilly mum, that's what she was called, right? This made headlines, right? It's part of the BBC Your Voice, Your Vote programme. And the subject was Cole Vyas, 22 years old at the time, and his mum, Alison. This was October last year. We're in the audience for a debate programme ahead of the Caerphilly by-election, and everyone knows that the BBC cherry-pick their audiences, right, for political reasons, and they plant people in the audiences. We covered before that on a BBC Question Time, they literally planted an illegal immigrant, legal alien, in the crowd and gave him one of those bone conduction headsets to regurgitate some pro-ECHR nonsense, right? They will cherry-pick and put people in the crowd. It might not have been the BBC, actually. I can't really remember. Don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that. It was one of these programs. I covered it a good few episodes ago. And people were suspecting, right, as they would, that this person may have been a plant. She was extremely vocal, right? Even after Claire Powell corrected her twice, she just went on this seemingly straw man. She seemed to straw man him twice, even backtracked on one of her straw men and then seemed to attack another straw man in her critique and then just made an emotional appeal. It was literally nothing, but it was a great propaganda moment. The trained SEALs in the audience all applauded and cheered as Claire Powell was basically trapped on stage waiting for the applause to die down and basically obviously having the game rigged against him at every single turn, right? And in this instance, but being doesn't seem to be a necessarily strong orator and seemed to freeze a little bit on stage in this interaction. Don't know whether he's maybe not prepared for it or whatever, but it wasn't necessarily a great look. The BBC, the Mini-True, right, the Ministry of Truth, they're great at creating these propaganda moments, right? They're great at creating these propaganda moments. This was the segment, and very sad to see that a Nation Cymru journalist by the name of Emily Price had a take on this in the comments, which we'll go through in a moment, that does not seem to have aged very well. But this was the interaction, part of the interaction between Claire Powell and Alison Vyas.
I'm born and bred in Caerphilly. I've lived here all my life. And I have their father, that's my other son.
Before that, lock her up. Lock her up. She's a white lady that said born and bred. Lock her up. That's racist. That's racist. That's far-right rhetoric. Now, see, it's fine when they do it. See how it's fine when they do it. Lock her up.
Is part of the 2.9% that you say are overtaking Caerphilly.
I haven't used that.
Right.
Well, you're using that immigration is overtaking the country.
I haven't said that either.
We've lived here all our lives, and I have never felt so unwelcome in my own hometown as I do since your party came into Caerphilly with all the rhetoric that you bring in. I have to say to my sons, please don't go there. Please don't do this. And quite frankly, Mr. Powell, I blame you for that.
Okay. Sit down.
I'm born and bred.
So there you go. You had the far-right racist comment, born and bred, right? Remember the lady that said she was born and bred in Falkirk and I think suffered investigation by the police for a supposed hate crime, right? 'Cause she was a white lady, a white Scottish lady that said she was born and bred in Falkirk. It's perfectly fine when the lefties do it. Perfectly fine when they say, I'm born and bred in Caerphilly to assert their then claim to globalism, right? But if you want to say that I'm born and bred in Caerphilly to assert your claim to nationalism, oh, well, that makes you a far-right Nazi. But you can see here, the whole exchange can be summed up with this facial expression. This was Claire's facial expression. I apologize if I'm getting your name wrong there, sir. This was his facial expression after he corrected her twice. After he corrected her twice, and then she proceeded to attack the second straw man again. Watch this exchange again, ladies and gentlemen. You'll see he corrects her on the first point, and even when she slightly backtracks, she seems to attack another straw man because he says quite clearly, and it should be audible, I didn't say that either. Just in case the audio filtration will filter it out, I will try and put the clip in if it does, so you can clearly hear that he says, I did not say that, when she makes her first emotional appeal about the or you saying that the 2.9% that are ruining Caerphilly. He says I didn't say that, and he says immigration has ruined the country. He says I didn't say that either.
I'm born and bred in Caerphilly. I've lived here all my life, and I have their father, that's my other son, is part of the 2.9% that you say are overtaking Caerphilly.
I haven't used that.
Right.
Well, you're using that immigration is overtaking the country.
I haven't said that either.
We've lived here.
So there you go. And then she just goes on to attack and just generate an emotional appeal and attack this straw man that she has built. It's absolutely disgusting. But it's fine when the lefties do it. It's fine when the lefties use language that would get anybody else locked up for different political opinions. It's fine when they attack strawmans based on things that he alleges that he did not say. That's perfectly fine. And they get clapping. You get the trained SEALs. You get the trained SEALs in the audience. like this, right? Apologies if that clipped over the limit, and apologies, headphone users. But it drives me nuts when I see this. When Emily Price, for example, shares this, a journalist for Nation Cymru, right, which appears to be one of these very left-wing outlets. Nigel Farage said, a solid performance from Claire Powell. And he said, and she quoted this, and this is where the clip is from, saying, although there was an awkward moment where a member of the audience with 2 young sons said she blamed Claire Powell for her family feeling welcome in Caerphilly. I expect Reform won't be sharing that clip. So here it is. Yeah, a clip with 2 straw man arguments. Clip with 2 straw man arguments and an emotional appeal. There was nothing there, right? Anyway, it's not necessarily Cole's fault for the situation he's been put in. Unfortunately, his dad, from what I understand, had to flee Idi Amin's regime in Uganda and chose to come to the UK, and he settled in bed with us. I'm sorry, the conversation around immigration, around policy and whatever, she tries to then go later on in the interaction to then say, well, we're not policies, we're human beings. Yeah, but human beings are governed by policy. We're talking about policy. That's what politicians are there for. So you had nothing but emotional appeals. And she was lauded as this brave mum standing up to this far-right racist fascist, right? Comment section on this post. Comment section on this post from Emily Jones. And she said, she was responding to a comment, and somebody said, quite, fittingly, appropriately, potentially, there could be some truth in it, that, I'll just quickly crop this down so that you can see a little bit better. Somebody commented, an account by the name of Remigration HQ, said she was definitely planted in the audience by the BBC. There is always a magically hostile audience member there to dig into reform. Happens on Question Time too, yet doesn't at all reflect their popularity in the polls. And the polling data and the vote data from the Caerphilly by-election show that yes, Plaid Cymru candidate won with a minority of the vote, thanks past the post, but also it was extremely close. It's extremely close, and Reform had a lot of support in that constituency. Emily responded. Nation Cymru journalists responded. I think they chose an audience that reflected the view across the political spectrum. Don't necessarily think that makes her a plant. I just think that she wouldn't vote Reform. Well. Would we have more to suggest that she was a plant, ladies and gentlemen, if it then later came out that Alison Vyas was standing as a Plaid Cymru candidate? Not even a few months later, not even 1 week into the new year, that then they would announce, Plaid Cymru constituency Caerphilly would announce that standing for Community Councillor Porset Ward, Alison Vyas, would that maybe make her a plant, ladies and gentlemen? Would that maybe insinuate that there was potentially more to this all along, and that maybe Mr. or Mrs. Remigration HQ might have had a bit more of a point, and that maybe, sadly, Emily's take had aged like milk in the Sahara? Well, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. Alison Vyas has been announced as a community councillor for Porset Ward, or standing for community councillor anyway, as a candidate. Oh, dare we may say that she may have been a plant all along. There may have been a political agenda all along. Oh, the far-right racists, the conspiracy theorists, are at it again. They were right again. This is the article, by the way, said, again, Wales Online at the time, and maybe they didn't know. I'm not blaming them. These are recent, revelations. These are recent announcements from Plaid Cymru. This was the article. Again, I blame you, Mr. Powell. Again, talking to Claire Powell, not Enoch Powell. I blame you, Mr. Powell. Bear in mind, most people thinking that Reform's remigration or deportation policy nowhere near strong enough. America's shown us that you can do, potentially even 10x in the first year what Reform said that they're going to do in their entire 5-year term. They're not even going to solve the illegal immigration problem in their 5 years. I blame you, Mr. Powell. Mum and her son tell Reform UK politician he made them feel unsafe in their hometown. Well, the vast number of new faces that I'm seeing in mine is making me feel very unsafe, making me feel very on edge, knowing that this is part of a concerted agenda, and that people like Alison want to continue that agenda, to continue to make the native Welsh person feel unsafe. That puts me on edge. That often does keep me up at night. I don't need to be on a BBC plant television programme to say that. Those things keep me up at night, especially seeing that they could be incumbent in the next fucking government. But Plaid Cymru did indeed make the announcement, as you can see here, has to be said, looking like she's absolutely chewing a wasp and not liking it whatsoever. Meet your campaigners for Van Ward Council by-election, Alison Vyas and a man known as Jeff Grenfell. Don't know anything about Jeff Grenfell, no problem with him whatsoever. Other than obviously he's standing for Plaid Cymru, which I think is a massive mistake. For the forthcoming Van Ward by-election to fill a vacancy on the Caerphilly County Borough Council, he's going to be taking that vacancy anyway. Or that's what that's what Plaid Cymru have chosen for that. Grew up in Lansbury Park. But then who do we see down here? Ooh, Plaid Cymru has also chosen Alison Vyas as its candidate for the vacancy on the Van Community Council. Maybe she was nothing more than a political activist who was planted in the audience by design by the BBC deliberately the whole time. And maybe the lefties, they didn't want to acknowledge it because they still think you're stupid enough to fall for it. Right? Just like the BBC, or whoever it was, I believe it was Question Time, if I'm not mistaken, thought that people would be fooled by a barely speaking English, what appeared to be Indian man with a clearly visible bone conduction headset on, reading from his phone that they admitted was an illegal alien into the country, to be a valid person, to be sitting down, asking politicians questions or asking the panel questions at a question time, and lauding the fruits of the ECHR, trying to make it seem as though it's great for the British people. Get absolutely fucked, the lot of you. Get absolutely fucked, the lot of you. Establishment hates you, ladies and gentlemen, not to mention they don't just hate you, they have such a contempt for you, they think you're so stupid that they can just do this stuff for you, and then a few months later they'll just say that, oh yeah, she's going to campaign for us anyway. And they'll think that, oh my God, they're not going to connect the dots. Right? Don't be their ideal fodder. Even if you disagree with me on many political views and everything like that, just don't be fodder for these things, basically. Just understand that the regime is far more Orwellian than I think that we even give it credit for. The BBC in this instance is nothing more, really, than an aspect of the Ministry of Truth, right? So understand that, especially with regards to these things, very rarely as it seems, even there's no end of containment figures on the right as well. Reform, it does seem, is just one giant big containment figure, right? Containment party, if you will. I think they're the best that Wales is going to get out of the options that it has, right? I think it's at the very least, as Joe Marsh pointed out, with a good rationalisation, at least with reform, Wales is not necessarily going to be any worse off than it is right now. It might not be what we want, might not be what the Welsh people want, it might not be what nationalists want, it might not be what even the centrists want or whatever. The votes will go as the way that they will go, right? Free, fair and safest elections of all time, right? I'm sure there'll be nothing shady going on if it turns out to not be going the left-wingers' ways. I'm sure there'll be nothing shady going on. But if reform get in, we won't be any worse off, I don't think. Now, that being said, reform could get in and they could betray every single election promise, right? And they could be even worse than Plaid Cymru. They could. At the end of the day, you're trusting other people to be your representatives in government, which has control pretty much over every aspect of your life. Once they're in that seat, you really have no control over what they do. Once they're in that seat, they actually have no reason to pander to you anymore, other than, I suppose, their own sense of honour and morality, I suppose. There's no actual mechanism, because you've entrusted them. Your vote is trust in somebody, which is why many people in Britain feel so aggrieved with so many of their leaders, because they trusted them. They trusted them to solve the problems time and time again, and they never did. That's why people are so angry. So people are so angry. 80, 75 to nearly 100 years, potentially even more, depending on what perspective on history you look at, of grievances, of bad decisions, of the British being a victim of their own political system. That's going to make people very angry. And we have a couple of choices here. Political figures can actually start doing what people want, what people are increasingly voicing their wants for in terms of political initiatives, or they can keep going down this track. A lot of them, I don't think their fate is going to be any different. The calls for Nuremberg 2.0 will only get stronger and louder, with more voices, more determination. A lot of people, I certainly hope, will have their day in court for actual fair trials. But you can't commit 75 to 100 years of crimes against the British people. Again, that estimate will vary depending on who you ask. And then just expect people in the modern day to be cool with it. And just say, oh yeah, that's fine, and just keep doing it. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Establishment have been doing the same thing over and over again and promising that it's going to bring about the results that we seek, but somehow we act surprised, for some reason we act surprised, when it results in more of the same. At some point we have to look at ourselves as well. Now granted, we don't really have much option at the moment other than still at the ballot box, but the more desperate people get, well, let's hope it doesn't go down that road. Let's hope it doesn't go down that road. No one wants to see brother fighting against brother, sister fighting against sister, mother fighting against daughter, father fighting against son. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody should want to see that anyway. Despite how aggrieved the lefties, native lefties, can often drive you, make you feel, shouldn't want armed conflict with them if it can be avoided. But we have been shown that aspects of them are very determined, and they will take the lives of anybody who is deemed as their opposition and who they've deemed as their opposition. Assassination of Charlie Kirk showed us that. The demonstrations where they've deliberately attacked people like Joe Marsh, supposedly being fascists and so on, with weapons and tried to take their lives and openly weaponize the police system which they hate against them. You still want them to be able to realize where they are and where their ideology has driven and will drive this country. All of our countries. We want them to realize that. Because the one thing with all of us, for different reasons, being aggrieved with the same government, the only thing people have to really combat that when the state has such a monopoly on force as ours does is the vast number of people that we have. If you imagine that every adult native man and woman was to descend on Westminster in the country, talking Wales, we're talking Scotland, right? Northern Ireland, there would be nothing that could be done aside from very atrocious things to stop that. That's all that we have. So, especially among the British, unity is what should always be strived for. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily compromise on your positions out of want for unity. It has to be unity in the right political outcome and in the right direction. That's all we can hope for. That's all we can hope for. The government and the establishment, the way that they've set it up, they're doing a tremendous job of pitting brother against brother, sister against sister, parents against each other, fathers against sons and daughters against mothers. Because they realize that the one true strength that they have to rival the monopoly of force, the one thing that they do have to shift the balance of force doctrine back in their favor, just a regular person whose rights are being trampled on, is their number. So just have a little think about that, ladies and gentlemen. And maybe keep that in mind when you have interactions with certain people, and think of ways that hearts and minds can be won. Not saying it will happen, but we shouldn't want to do certain things until it becomes the absolute last resort, and hope and pray that it never gets to that point. And that'll do it for today. Nearly 2 hours. That first story took a while to get through, eh? Just to reiterate, no accusations, no allegations against any entity, any individual. Just a call for what I believe, and what I feel that you guys will, having seen that as well, will be the need for formal investigation. And I hope it turns up nothing. I hope it turns up nothing. But still, investigation probably far beyond my means is needed. And I'll do it for today. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for watching. Hwyl fawr. See you next time. You take very good care of yourselves now. Make sure you go support in the membership areas. And make sure you stay tuned for a good conversation I've got coming up, not only with Catherine Watkins, but in the near future as well. Take care, ladies and gentlemen. Godspeed.